The Baltimore Inner Harbor is the most cited example of successful urban waterfront renewal in American planning history. The project that every subsequent American city pointed to when proposing its own waterfront development, and the project whose 40-year accounting most precisely documents what urban renewal actually produces, which is more complicated than the citation would suggest. By every metric that was available in 1985, 10 years after the Inner Harbor's centerpiece projects had opened, the project was an unambiguous success. The National Aquarium opened in 1981. The Harborplace Festival Marketplace opened in 1980. The Maryland Science Center had relocated to the harbor in 1976. The Convention Center opened in 1979. Downtown Baltimore, which had been experiencing the same deindustrialization and population loss that had afflicted every major northeastern and midwestern American city, had a functioning waterfront that attracted visitors, generated hotel nights, and produced the kind of visible civic revival that justified every political investment that had been made in its development. The problem with measuring the Baltimore Inner Harbor in 1985 is that you are measuring the first 10 years of a 40-year urban development investment. The first 10 years of any major urban development investment look like the investment's return because the capital has been spent and the visible improvements are in place. The 40-year return is a different calculation. The forensic entry point for this case is the 40-year accounting. What the Baltimore Inner Harbor investment produced for the city of Baltimore across 4 decades measured not against the 1985 media coverage of its success, but against the economic trajectory of the city, whose downturn it was supposed to revitalize and whose broader economic conditions it was embedded in. Subscribe now, because the Baltimore Inner Harbor is the case file where the measurement period matters more than the measurement. The Baltimore Inner Harbor's development between the mid-1960s and the mid-1980s reflected the specific urban renewal theory that dominated American city planning across the post-war period. The proposition that a catalytic public investment in a city's most visible public space, in Baltimore's case, the former industrial waterfront, whose Bethlehem Steel Sparrows Point facility and general industrial harbor function had been rendered economically obsolete by deindustrialization, could generate private investment activity and population retention in the surrounding areas sufficient to reverse the economic decline that deindustrialization had produced. The theory was not baseless. Catalytic public investment in high-visibility urban infrastructure does generate private investment response, and the private development that followed the Inner Harbor's public anchor investments was genuine. The hotels, the office buildings, the retail development, and the residential conversion projects that transformed the waterfront blocks around the harbor between 1975 and 1995 represented real private capital responding to the public investment's anchor effect. The specific limitation of the catalytic investment theory, which the Baltimore Inner Harbor's 40-year accounting documents more precisely than any other American urban renewal case, is the theory's inability to distinguish between the revitalization of a specific district and the revitalization of a city's underlying economic trajectory. The Inner Harbor district has been commercially active, visitor-attracting, and physically maintained across most of its 40-year history. The city of Baltimore's broader economic trajectory, its population decline, its median household income relative to the surrounding metropolitan area, its public school system performance, its crime statistics, its downtown office market outside the waterfront district, has followed a different arc that the Inner Harbor's success has not substantially altered. Baltimore's population in 1950 was approximately 950,000. Its population today is approximately 575,000. The Inner Harbor opened during that population decline and did not reverse it. The catalytic investment theory predicts that an anchor public investment in a city's most visible space will generate economic activity sufficient to attract population and private capital. The Baltimore 40-year accounting suggests that the catalytic investment can generate economic activity in the specific district, while the broader economic conditions that are driving population decline continue to operate outside the district's boundaries. The specific financial instruments that funded the Baltimore Inner Harbor's development reflect the urban renewal financing mechanisms that were available in the 1960s and 1970s. Federal Urban Renewal Program funds, Community Development Block Grant allocations, State of Maryland capital investment, City of Baltimore, general obligation bond financing, and the tax increment financing mechanisms that allowed the increased property tax revenues from the developed waterfront to service the debt that had financed the public infrastructure. These mechanisms worked as designed. The waterfront development did generate property tax revenues substantially above the pre-development baseline. The tax increment financing did service the associated debt, and the federal and state capital that had seeded the development did leverage private investment in the ratios that the urban renewal program's financial model projected. The accounting gap emerges when the district-level financial success is compared against the city-level fiscal stress that coexisted with it. Baltimore's school system, its public safety infrastructure, and its social services have been chronically underfunded across the same 40-year period during which the Inner Harbor was generating positive real estate returns and visitor spending. The fiscal resources that were not available for those city-level investments were, in part, committed to servicing the infrastructure bonds that had financed the Inner Harbor's development. The Convention Center, documented in Case File 097's analytical framework as the prototypical American public finance instrument, whose impact is systematically overstated, was one of the Inner Harbor anchor investments, opened in 1979, expanded subsequently, consistently generating economic impact projections that exceeded its documented actual visitor-driven spending. The Harborplace Marketplace, which opened in 1980 as the first American festival marketplace and which set the template for dozens of similar developments in other American cities, declared bankruptcy in 1990, 10 years after opening, and has subsequently experienced multiple ownership transitions and declining commercial vitality as the retail model that festival marketplaces represented has been undermined by the same e-commerce and suburban retail competition that has affected American retail broadly. The 40-year accounting of the Baltimore Inner Harbor raises a specific question that the catalytic investment theory does not answer. What would the city's economic trajectory have looked like if the same capital had been deployed differently? This is the counterfactual that urban renewal's evaluative framework rarely asks, because the catalytic investment is typically evaluated against the pre-investment baseline rather than against the alternative uses of the same capital. The Inner Harbor's development is measured against the industrial wasteland that the harbor was before the investment, not against what the city might have become if the same resources had been deployed in public education, infrastructure maintenance, or economic diversification strategies. The counterfactual cannot be answered with certainty. What the 40-year accounting can document is the specific observation that a city can simultaneously produce a world-famous urban waterfront that attracts tourists from across the United States and experience a 40% population decline, chronic fiscal stress, and persistent economic underperformance relative to its metropolitan region, and that the presence of the first set of outcomes does not prevent the second set. The Baltimore Inner Harbor is a genuine achievement. It is a beautiful waterfront. It generates visitor spending. It provides recreational access to a population whose ancestors worked the industrial harbor that it replaced. It is the most frequently cited American urban waterfront renewal success. It is also the city whose public schools have been under state receivership, whose population has declined by 375,000 people since 1950, and whose economic trajectory has not been substantially altered by the catalytic investment that the Inner Harbor represented. Both of those things are the Baltimore Inner Harbor's 40-year accounting. The measurement period matters more than the measurement. This content was developed using artificial intelligence tools as part of the research, writing, and production process. All AI-generated material was subject to human review, editorial intervention, and approval before publication.